Welcome to episode 11 of ADHD Adultish. 11 episodes. Holy shit. We made it past the 10 episode hump, which apparently like 80% of podcasts don't do. That's pretty awesome, huh? And I've had people listening from all over the world, which is pretty surreal. So before we get started, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone who's been listening and sharing. It absolutely means the world to me. So today I want to talk about something that is a little more personal for a lot of people with ADHD. For many of us who are late diagnosed, it can be quite a journey as we learn more about the different things ADHD affects. And more specifically, disentangling the parts of ourselves that we thought were just our personalities or our own personal failings. The deeper we fall down that rabbit hole, many of us find ourselves wondering whether we even have a personality or if we're just a walking collection of ADHD traits. To take that one step further, you may start to realize that a lot of the face you show to the outside world is not, in fact, you, but a facade that you put up to hide parts of yourself from the rest of the world. If you have ever felt like you had to perform normalcy just to fit in, then this episode is for you. So let's jump in and unpack the topic of ADHD masking. What is it? Why do we do it? And how can we start to unmask and show up as our real, messy, and awesome selves? All right, so what is masking? Well, masking is exactly what it sounds like. It is when someone with ADHD suppresses or hides their symptoms to fit into the world around them, to seem more neurotypical. Maybe you force yourself to sit still even though your body is dying to move. Maybe you overprepare for meetings to avoid being called out for missing details. Maybe you watch how other people act in social situations and copy them so that you don't stand out too much. If any of this sounds familiar, congratulations, you've been masking. Me too. If you've been doing it for years, you might not even know where the mask ends and you begin. And while masking might help us blend in, it also requires a shit ton of effort. And more importantly, constantly hiding significant parts of yourself can lead to emotional exhaustion, identity issues, and a general sense of inauthenticity. It can feel like we aren't being who we're supposed to be or who we want to be. Over time, the continuous effort to appear neurotypical can damage our self-esteem, making it hard to fully accept our neurodivergence. And that, in my experience, can make it even harder to manage it successfully. The ongoing pressure causes us mental fatigue and makes us feel isolated, misunderstood, and even in what should be safe environments like at home or with our friends and family. But let's back up for a minute and talk about why we mask. Because it certainly isn't random. We mask because we feel like we need to. For many reasons. Fear of judgment, for example. Most of us have spent most of our lives being told we're too loud or too forgetful or too distracted or just too much. So we learn to, shrink ourselves down to avoid criticism or being ostracized or to avoid getting in trouble at school or at home. Desire for acceptance is another big reason. Humans are wired for connection, and when your brain wiring makes you stand out in a less than desirable way, like interrupting when people are talking, fidgeting all the time, or being super distracted, well, you start editing yourself. Sometimes you get so good at it that people stop seeing you and only see the mask. Even worse, you may get so good at it that you think that you've won and you're finally doing it right. But what exactly does masking look like? It can be different for everyone. I mentioned a few examples earlier, but women with ADHD are more likely to mask due to societal expectations around behavior, organization, emotional regulations, those sort of things. Since ADHD in women is very undiagnosed, many of us learn early on that we have to work extra hard to appear competent and in control. That can look like over-preparing for tasks and events to avoid making mistakes, hyper-focusing on social cues and copying what we see as normal behaviors to fit in, internalizing our struggles so that we appear calm on the outside, even though on the inside we are experiencing complete and utter chaos. It can be suppressing emotions and stopping ourselves from expressing frustration to avoid being labeled as dramatic or too emotional. It can also look like relying on excessive structure to compensate for executive function challenges. Men with ADHD might feel pressured to conform to more traditional ideas of masculinity, which often discourages emotional expression and vulnerability. While hyperactivity is more commonly associated with ADHD in boys and men, many may learn to mask those traits by forcing themselves into rigid self-discipline, forcing themselves to appear calm even when they feel restless, suppressing impulsivity in professional and social settings to avoid appearing reckless, overworking to prove their competence and avoid criticism, using humor or bravado to deflect attention from their struggles, downplaying struggles and avoiding seeking help due to stigma around mental health. Children with ADHD often start masking early in response to feedback from parents, teachers, and their peers. They need to fit in and avoid getting in trouble, and it can lead them to suppress their natural instincts, what their brain is telling them to do, like holding in their energy at school but having emotional outbursts at home due to the exhaustion of just trying to keep their shit together all day. Copying their classmates to appear more focused or engaged in lessons, avoiding asking for help out of fear of being seen as different or being called lazy or being told, well, you could do it if you just tried harder if you really wanted to, pretending to understand instructions even when they're struggling. There's another form of masking that I think is maybe a little bit less talked about. That is mirroring. Mirroring is where we kind of subconsciously copy other people's speech patterns, interests, or mannerisms. Have you ever adopted someone's catchphrases without realizing it, or find yourself adjusting your personality depending on who you're around? Or have you ever gotten so used to people pleasing that you don't even know what you actually want? Now, to be very clear, masking can look like anything for anyone of any age. These are just some examples to help you start looking at the things that might be, or the ways it might be showing up in your life. Next question is, what's wrong with masking? Well, masking might not hurt anything if you're trying to just get through a work meeting or some random social event, but when you keep up the mask constantly, over time it can take a big toll. I mentioned some of the drawbacks earlier, but I wanted to get more specific. So let's start with burnout. Constantly monitoring yourself can be exhausting, mentally, emotionally, and yes, even physically. If you're constantly running social scripts in your brain, controlling impulses and filtering thoughts 24/7, then no wonder you feel drained. Prolonged masking can lead to burnout, a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by the sustained efforts to suppress your symptoms. Masking is also a factor in delayed diagnosis. A lot of us, especially women, go undiagnosed for years because we got too good at masking. Research shows that those who engage in high levels of masking are often misdiagnosed with anxiety or depression instead of ADHD, leading to, ineffective treatment. So it can also just cause you to lose yourself. When you spend so much time pretending to be someone else, it's easy to lose track of who you really are. Many ADHDers who have masked for years report difficulty recognizing their own preferences, emotions, and needs because they have spent so much time prioritizing external expectations. And I think most of us can agree that that pretty much sucks. It can also take a physical toll on your health. Chronic masking doesn't just affect your brain, it can affect the body too. Heightened stress from sustained masking can lead to a whole host of issues. Tension headaches, sleep disturbance, immune system suppression, and even cardiovascular issues. People who mask extensively may experience chronic fatigue and unexplained physical symptoms as a result of the long-term stress responses. So yeah, masking might be no big deal every now and then, but over time it can take a massive toll. So at this point, I think that it's important to clarify here that there is a difference between masking and coping, because there are plenty of things that you might do to cope with your ADHD that are beneficial, not harmful. Maybe you keep your desk super organized so that you can focus better because visual clutter is super distracting for you. That's different than being hyper vigilant about keeping your desk clean because you don't want your coworkers to think you're messy and disorganized. One is to help you be able to work in a less stressful environment. The other involves stressing yourself out to avoid judgment from other people. Hopefully that makes sense. Because there are a ton of ways that we can find to cope with ADHD struggles that are incredibly beneficial to us. I've talked about plenty of them on this podcast. Hell, a big part of the reason this podcast exists is to share strategies for managing ADHD. If you're trying to figure out whether something is masking or coping, then taking some time to consider why you do it and whether it makes you feel better or worse can be helpful. Now, on to the next question. How do we start unmasking? Because as you can imagine, it's probably not the best idea to just say, fuck it, and throw all the structure out the window and announce to everyone you know, hey, this is just who I am, fucking deal with it. I mean, you can certainly do that if it's what feels right. That's a personal decision and I won't judge. But for most of us, it will probably be a little easier to work on finding balance between being yourself while still existing in a world that isn't always ADHD friendly. So here are some ideas to help you get the ball rolling. First is just to start noticing when you mask, because it's hard to stop doing something if you don't know that you're doing it. Take some time and intentionally pay attention to the situations where you feel like you're performing instead of just being. It's also very helpful to identify places that you can unsafely mask, whether it's a group of friends, a therapist, an online community. It can be helpful to start practicing unmasking in places where you won't be judged. If you don't have any friends or family that you feel comfortable unmasking with, then I highly recommend looking for ADHD-focused groups. That could be support groups or group coaching settings, or even Facebook groups for people with ADHD who are interested in the same things you're interested in. Mindset work is also going to be critical here. I'm sure you saw that coming. It's time to start reframing the flaws that you are trying to mask, and you can't see it, but I'm using air quotes there. Look at the things you're trying to cover up and truly ask yourself whether you think there's something wrong with these things or if you've just been conditioned to dislike them about yourself. Are you too much, or are you passionate about your interests? Are you bad at focusing, or are you great at hyper-focusing on the things that light you up? Are you bad at keeping up with your laundry, or is laundry bad at being interesting enough for you to keep up with? Finally, it can be helpful to experiment with being authentically you. Try letting go of one small piece of masking and just see what happens. Maybe you speak up in a meeting without over-preparing. Let yourself fidget without feeling guilty or like you're bothering people. Test the waters in small ways. As one of the most authentic fictional characters of all time says, take chances, make mistakes, get messy. And yes, I'm quoting Miss Frizzle from the Magic School Bus, because she's fucking awesome. Now, before I wrap this up, I thought I'd share a little bit of my own unmasking journey, because it is part of the reason this podcast currently exists. It almost didn't. I have had the idea for this podcast for, maybe 2 years before the first episode aired. I knew that I wanted to share the things I've learned. I knew that I wanted to give people something to relate to, and I knew I wanted to be as much myself as I could possibly be. But the truth is, I argued with myself constantly over that last part. So starting this podcast has been kind of a wild ride of overcoming a lot of fears about putting myself out there and doing it authentically. And I finally decided to do it after a really good call with my ADHD coach. Here are the 2 questions she asked that got me over the hurdle. 1, what's the worst that could happen? And 2, what's the best that could happen? Surprisingly, those answers came very easily. The worst that could happen is that people think I suck and they hate it. The best thing that could happen is that someone out there is helped, even in a small way, or just feels a little bit less alone in their struggles. And when it comes down to it, it really makes no difference to me if people think I suck. But it really, really matters to me if there are people that I could have helped and I didn't. So I recorded the first episode while I had a cold, because why not? I edited it myself. That's such a freaking hard word to say. I edited it myself, and I fought the urge to re-record it 10,000 times until it was better. It was messy, but that's how it goes when you're first trying something new, and it has 100% been worth it. It feels good to be myself. F-bombs, Lord of the Ring references, and all. At the end of the day, masking is a survival strategy, a way we have learned to navigate a world that doesn't always make space for us. And if it's something you feel like you need to still rely on, then that's okay. I promise, I'm not judging. Unmasking isn't a requirement, it's an option when and if you're ready, and one that you get to approach in your own way, at your own pace, and in the environments where you feel safe to do so. The important thing, I think, is just to start giving yourself permission to exist as you whenever you can, and whatever that looks like. So that's all I've got for you today. As always, if you found this episode helpful, please like and subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one, and share it with someone who might find it useful too. If you want more ADHD info, hacks, and stories, head on over to my website, levelupmyadhd.com, and sign up for my newsletter. Until next week, take care of yourself. Now go be awesome.